The region's most popular talk show, Midlands Today on Midlands 103.
Midlands 103.
Well, we started off by talking about the single currency and about our own money worries here, but can you imagine surviving on $2 a day? Journalist Claire O'Brien is with us. She travelled to Haiti last week and has come back, and I've just been talking to her off air, and I'm getting the impression, Claire, you're a little emotionally drained or sapped by the experience, are you?
It was much more than I expected that it would be, because I went, as you know, it was listeners to Joe Cooney's Country Roads programme who raised phenomenal funds in January in the early part of 2010 after the earthquake that struck Haiti. And my reason for going was to report back to those people what was being done with the money that they had raised. And I had kind of gone, I suppose, I'd gone with the intention of volunteering. There were journalists there who weren't volunteering, who were solely reporting, but I'd gone with the intention of volunteering and bringing back the experience. And I took my microphone and I did some recordings, and you'll hear some of those. But I didn't expect to engage as much with it as I did.
Well, as a journalist, you come across cases and you cover the courts quite a lot, and they are sad stories, they're emotive, and you have to be able to switch off in order to report. You were saying this is an altogether different experience. You can't
completely
detach.
Different. No, you do have to, in reporting the courts, you have to have a kind of a professional distance. That means you don't take everything personally. Otherwise, you couldn't report it. You couldn't report things fairly and accurately if you get emotionally involved or upset by every single story that you see. And there are tragic stories every day in the courts. We talked about one of them yesterday. But it was impossible. I think what I will take, the image that will stay with me all forever from my experience in Haiti, was the bus journey from the airport to the campsite that we stayed at. And the first thing that we noticed when we came out was an enormous shanty town where people were living in huts that were held up with sticks probably the width of your fist and probably maybe 8 or 10 feet tall, covered in tarpaulin and plastic. And we passed that, and I was shocked by it. But I've been in South Africa before. We've been through and I've seen that. So it wasn't as stunned by that until we moved on. And you go through the city, and I've been trying to think of how I could explain to people what this is like. And if you were to imagine that you live in Mountmellick or Tullamore or Portlaoise, and that somebody gets an enormous machine gun and blows up the street in front of you, so that your main street is... There are patches of road, but a lot of it is rubble. There are piles of rubble everywhere. As you move, you raise the dust because there's no covering on the road. And this is the main streets going through Port-au-Prince,
Which is the capital.
Which is the capital city. That the houses and the buildings are like wedding cakes that have just collapsed, one layer into the next, into the next. Very little seems to have been rebuilt. That people are living on the side of the road, and everywhere you look, there is endless rows of these huts. And again, I was trying to think, how would I explain this to people? If you can imagine that your whole world, the home that you have, your 3 up, 2 down, or whatever it is that you're living in, is reduced down to the size of your bathroom. And that you take the front wall off your bathroom and you take the side wall off your bathroom, and you cover it. You don't have a roof, but you cover it with plastic. And your front wall is open so that everybody who passes by sees how you live in this tiny little bathroom-sized space. And that is where whatever belongings you have are kept. That is where your children are made, born, reared, and probably die. And to see house after, call them house, hut after hut after hut, and that's in the cities. And then you move to the country areas, and we were in a rural area, and it's impossible to say what makes a village in rural Haiti, because if you go through a village in Ireland, you see the houses. The village is marked by the houses. There are no houses. There are bits of rubble, and there are beautiful gates. The gates are still standing, strangely, where there would have been fine houses behind them. But all you see are the people. There are hundreds and hundreds of people, and everybody is out on the street and on the side of the road. And you can pass... We went through very, very rural areas, and all you see people everywhere, and it's only when you look a bit more closely that you can see where in the undergrowth they have built their homes, with the mud floors and the pieces of plastic, bits of timber, bits of galvanised, basically whatever they can salvage to put something together to live under. And they're outside. It's very hot, obviously. They spend a lot of their time outside during the day and under the shelter of trees. But
Okay, I presume you're getting the same images as I am when Claire is talking, but I'm wondering what the feeling is. You know, those people coping in those conditions day to day. What is their attitude? How do they see the world?
It's hard to know, and I suppose as a volunteer and as somebody who goes working with a charity, you don't necessarily know what's going on in people's heads. What seems the Haitian people have very strong evangelical Christian beliefs. And I have a little piece of audio here from a man named Dancin. Now he's Haitian, and people may find his accent a little bit difficult to understand, but he has good English. He grew up in Port-au-Prince, the son of a gang leader, and his father was a very powerful gang leader. And when he was 10 or 11, he decided that he wanted to follow the way of God. He didn't want to be involved in gangs, and his father put him out of the house, so he became involved in a Christian community.
Right. Brave decision for a very young boy.
For a very young boy. They have very strong, very, very strong religious beliefs. He's 28 now. When the earthquake happened 2 years ago, he had a 4-year-old son who was in his home when the building collapsed, and his son lost his life. And he set up an orphanage in the most rural of rural places. We could only get to it by 4-wheel drive, and there were 19 children there who seem very, very happy. When I put all the audio together, hopefully I'll get a documentary out of it and you'll hear how happy the kids are. But the conditions are appalling. There is no sanitation, there is no sewage treatment, there is no waste disposal. The rubbish piles up all over the place, and children are walking around in this.
You've mentioned how intensely religious they are.
Yeah.
And here in Ireland we count ourselves by and large as a Catholic country, and we get angry with God over, by comparison, trivial things, when our lot in life doesn't seem as good as the neighbours. Are they angry with how they have been treated in the world?
I didn't get a sense of that. Now, maybe I didn't speak to enough Haitians to get a sense of that. But if you listen to this little piece of audio, he starts by talking about the earthquake, and then you hear his reaction to it and the conversation that he had with God afterwards.
At Cushionville. And after I was sleeping in my bed, so I will have one boy here, he will have 4 years.
You had a son?
Yeah, his name Lewinsky, but he died in the creek with me. So when the house is broken down with my family, with some people in the house, so I don't know anything. Only I see my eyes is closed. I cannot speak with anybody. My mouth is closed. I cannot open. Only I will have one prayer in my heart. I don't forget that. Only I said, hey, Jesus, if you want me to go, what now? I am ready to go. So I know what do you say. I know what you promise. You say you are there with me for my life, because I know the Spirit, you will come to help me. I say, thank you, Jesus, because I would like you to come to take me now, if you want to take me. So I know I'm not ready, but I have many things to do for you. I'd like to continue to work with you.
I don't know very many Irish people who would have that kind of don't know many people, full stop, who would have that attitude.
But it's a curious symptom of faith, isn't it, that in such an awful event, rather than rock the foundation of his belief, it actually reinforces it.
And the people are so incredibly resilient. And one of the things that I suppose that made me very angry was around children and schooling, and it made me angry about Ireland, not about Haiti. The majority of people, as I said, more than half the people there live on less than $2 a day. And there are bits and pieces of things that people can do to make money. They trade in things. They grow bananas. Somebody might have a cow. I saw lots of chickens and goats and animals around the place, and people do some trading. And actually, one of the things that Dennis O'Brien did when he came to Haiti first was he rebuilt the marketplace to give people a place that they could trade and develop their own local economy. And that had been destroyed during the earthquake. But beside where the campsite was, where we stayed, we all stayed in tents in a campsite in Christianville, aptly named. There was a school beside us, and there were 750 children attending that school, children of all ages, from very, very small to into their 20s, because you have to pay for your education in Haiti. Nobody is entitled to anything.
Okay,
So
and if you're
I
earning
can see
$2 a day, how expensive is education, I wonder?
in the school that was beside us, it works out at $140 a year.
A year?
A year. And there were 750 children there. And because people can't always afford to send their children early, that's why some of the people are there until their 20s, because they don't start until much, much later. But the value that they place on education is extraordinary. The children must wear their uniform, and they're immaculate. And I'll have a little clip that gives you a little gist of that in a couple of minutes.
But in saying you were angry then about our attitude here in Ireland, is it that you feel we don't appreciate what we have as much as we should?
I don't think it's a sense of appreciation or even taking things for granted. I think there's an underlying sense of entitlement. This is mine, I must have it, I am entitled to this. And when you see 3-year-olds getting off the back of a motorbike, because most of the transport is on motorbikes and these little trucks, and they're paying the taxi driver for taking them to school, and then you hear people in this country complaining that it's going to cost them €50 a year towards their school transport. It made me angry to think how this great sense of entitlement that Irish people have, that doesn't seem to be shared by the people in Haiti, that they get on with it. If they want their children to go to school, then they work for it and they send their children to school.
And do they pay taxes as well? Because I would suggest that's where a lot of our sense of entitlement comes from, that we have a huge tax wedge and we feel, well, I want a bloody return on that.
Yeah, and people are entitled to a return. If you pay the taxes, you shouldn't be exploited as a result of that. But government in Haiti is, it was a French colony. There were a number of dictators there afterwards. They're only getting to grips now with democracy and government. And as I say, there are no services provided in the sense of waste or sanitation or any of that kind of thing, and road development, infrastructure. So where taxes fit into all that, I don't know. But it seems to be a lot of communities that come together, like the Christian community in Christianville, who help to develop the school and to make it a place where people want to send their children. And the school rooms are like, I suppose if you were to imagine an old-fashioned cowhouse, which is, it's a big open building, very high ceiling. Ceiling is made of galvanised. There are panels along the sides of the walls, and then it's open at the bottom and open just under the roof to let the air through. And you can walk through it. There are no doors. There's a huge open space that allows you to walk straight through. And these there was concrete on the floor of these. That's not the case everywhere. So these are very open places. And what happened while we were there was that some of the volunteers who got ahead of themselves painting out at the building site where the homes are being built, went in and did some painting excuse me, at this school, and they painted beautiful murals. And one of the people that I spoke to that day was Orla McCrory. Now, Orla is from Portlaoise. Her entire family, herself, her husband Mark, and her 6 children went.
I want to hear about Orla
Yes.
and the work you've done, because you've done a good job painting the pictures for us. We have the visual imagery, we have the feeling, the scene is set. Let's hear about the work that was done in just a moment.
If you've got a comment, call Will now on 0818 300 103
0818 300 103.
or text us 083 3010 103. The Midlands Today Show with Will Faulkner.
Midlands 103.
Claire O'Brien is with us, fresh off her trip to Haiti, and you were about to introduce Orla McCrory.
Yes, Orla is from Portlaoise. Her entire family, her husband Mark and her children, all 6, her 4 children went to Haiti. They fundraised over €36,000 in and around Portlaoise. Orla is a preschool teacher, and I spoke to her here just at the school next to where the campsite was about the work that she was doing.
The children are lovely. We've been here in the school next door to the Haven site, and the reason we're here is because the painting team works so fast. We're actually ahead of schedule, even though we lost a day on the way out because the flight had been delayed for 24 hours. But when we came into this it's a kindergarten, and it's quite shocking because I have a playgroup in Portlaoise, and gosh, when you think of the lovely facilities that Irish children have, and yet these children arrive into school immaculate. School is so highly thought of here, which is wonderful. Maybe that's what will change the community. But they come in their pristine uniforms, socks and everything to match, and ribbons in their hair. But I know when Mark was here 2 years ago, he was working on a project building an extra classroom onto the school, and so he had photographs of these children, and then he had photographs of the same children in the afternoon when they were finished school down by the river in just their underwear, because their uniforms are so valued that that's one of the most precious things they have. And here yesterday when we were painting, it was impossible to keep the children out away from the paint because they were so curious to see what was going on, and they wanted photographs, and they love you to take a photograph and show it to them, and then they love taking photographs of everybody, but they're fascinated by it. But anyway, some of the children leaned against the paint, and one child got paint on her uniform, so we brought her over to the teacher, and it was washable paint, and the teacher took her, but a little while later we saw the teacher out with the basin of water scrubbing it. Now it'll dry quickly, but I'd say if that child had been murdered if they went home with paint on their clothes, because they're so precious, it's been extremely moving. It's amazing to see the difference. We just did murals on the walls here today, yesterday and today, and it's not going to change these children's lives, but just might bring a smile to their faces.
That's Orla McCrory. She's an amazing person, and I have to say every volunteer that I met out there was one incredible person after another, and to be part of that amazing experience of these 300 people, everybody who had sacrificed something to be there to make a difference.
Can we talk about the difference that was made? Because part of your role was to document it, and you've done that. But physically, what did you leave behind?
Physically, the people who were building, and I wasn't one of them, I was in the canteen and working on the food, physically we left behind 55 homes for people who are living in those plastic huts that I told you about, and they are gorgeous. They're absolutely beautiful. They're quite small, but they're fabulous. And by the time Habitat for Humanity are finished there this week, there will be several hundred houses completed, which is a community. So it's incredible. And I can't say enough about the incredible work of the volunteers, the foremen, the people who were out in 47-degree heat on the Friday that we were there. And they still had their hats on, and they got on with it. They painted, they roofed, they put everything together, and they are amazing people. But just to finish up, because I know we're getting to the very end, the founder of Haven is Leslie Buckley, and he cut the ribbon on one of those houses. There was a kind of a handover ceremony on Friday afternoon, and he cut the ribbon on one of the houses, and I spoke to him afterwards, and the last question that I asked him before he finished up in the interview was, for people who are here in Ireland and who can't see the situation that people are living in and the difference that these tiny little 11 by 16 houses will make for them, I asked him to explain. What would he say to those people?
Well, the people in Ireland are going through a rough time. There are many of them that I know. But I think if they just had the opportunity of coming out and experiencing what the 300 volunteers experienced in the last week, they'd say, relatively speaking, we are so well off as a people, right? And, these are one-roomed houses that we are handing over today, but they are like palaces to the people. When you see the conditions that they've been living in, right? Mud huts, when it rains, the water pours in, they are exposed to thunderstorms, they're exposed to hurricanes, So these now houses give them shelter, and they are hurricane proof, and hopefully it gives them a new start in life. So I would say to the people, just maybe think a little beyond ourselves.
And that's Leslie Buckley bringing Claire's report to an end. Claire, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.